You know that feeling, right? When you're watching a movie or a show and a villain just gets under your skin. But what happens when an actor plays that part so perfectly that the performance itself starts to feel a little too real, when it gets genuinely hard to separate the person from the monster they're playing?
And this quote it nails it. We're not talking about some big, over-the-top, cackling villain here. No, a functionally perfect performance is something else entirely. It's so real, so convincing. It feels less like you're watching a character and more like you're getting a glimpse of something truly dark inside the actor themselves.
And here's what makes these performances so incredibly unsettling. They make evil make sense. Suddenly, the villain's terrible actions follow this twisted kind of logic. And that can have some very, very real consequences for the actor bringing that role to life.
We're calling that the villain's shadow. It's what happens when an actor's commitment is so absolute that we, the audience, we kind of lose sight of the person behind the mask. And their incredible acting starts being treated less like a craft and more like, well, evidence. So let's dive into a few examples.
First up, we've got a really interesting case. This is a character who was never even meant to be a villain, but the way she was portrayed ended up making her the antagonist in the eyes of so many viewers. I'm talking about Iris West from The Flash.
Just look at the massive disconnect here. In one column, you have what she says, all supportive stuff. But then you look at what she actually does, and it's a completely different story. It's constant friction, subtle sabotage. She says she wants Barry to be happy, but her actions just scream jealousy. And this isn't a one-off thing. This gap between her words and her actions just gets wider and wider over 9 seasons.
Oh, and this line says it all. I mean, it's supposed to sound like they're a team, right? But it just comes across as so incredibly condescending. Barry's the one taking the punches, dealing with all the trauma, putting his life on the line every single week, and she frames it like she's an equal partner in that identity. It's that kind of thing, that consistent undermining of the hero's own journey, that just builds and builds resentment.
And that's where the real-world impact kicks in. The performance was just so good at creating that tension that all the audience's frustration didn't just land on the character. No, it spilled over onto Candice Patton, the actress who played her so convincingly.
So Iris West is this fascinating example of an antagonist who was never supposed to be one. But what happens when the villainy is 100% on purpose? Well, let's take a look at how this whole idea applies to some more traditional villains. We're going to break down 3 very different but equally perfect types of evil.
First up, we've got the kind of evil that doesn't use a magic wand, but a clipboard and a sickeningly sweet smile. Of course, I'm talking about Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter.
Imelda Staunton's performance is absolutely terrifying because she never plays Umbridge like a monster. She's the opposite. She's sweet, she's patronizing, she's got that high-pitched, frilly voice, all while using rules and regulations to inflict just horrific pain. And the scariest part, she truly, genuinely believes she's helping. For her, cruelty is discipline. There's no mask to take off. With Umbridge, that institutional, bureaucratic evil is the person.
Okay, next. We're shifting from evil with a smile to an evil defined by just absolute nothingness. Let's talk about Todd Alquist from the end of Breaking Bad.
What is so bone-chilling about Todd is how he removes all psychology from violence. To him, it's not personal. It's just a task, a procedure, the cleanest solution. Morality just isn't part of the equation. And the actor, Jesse Plemons, plays him with this polite, mild-mannered flatness. It shows us a man who is terrifying not because he's full of rage, but because he's full of nothing. Just an absolute void where a conscience is supposed to be.
And for our third archetype, we have evil that's born from pure genius, a genius that's completely cut off from any kind of morality. I'm talking about the High Evolutionary from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Chukwudi Iwuji doesn't play this guy like a raving lunatic. No, he plays him like a calm, focused university professor, a visionary. To him, entire species are just raw materials for his grand project. He talks about his horrifying experiments, even wiping out entire worlds, with the genuine passion of an artist explaining his masterpiece. The terror comes from his complete, unshakable belief that he's right. You're watching someone for whom evil is just the logical next step for a genius who has no conscience.
All right, for our last deep dive, let's look at a villain whose evil isn't born from some grand conviction or a creepy emptiness. No, this one's cruelty comes from a place of deep, almost pathetic weakness. Let's talk about Commodus in Gladiator.
And this, right here, is the absolute key to the whole performance. Joaquin Phoenix doesn't give us some larger-than-life emperor. He gives us a small, needy, wounded little boy who just happens to hold the power of life and death over everyone in the entire Roman Empire.
And you can see this split right here. In public, he puts on the show. He's the emperor. It's all rehearsed confidence for the roaring crowds. But behind closed doors, he's a petulant child. He's emotionally fragile, he's constantly desperate for approval, and he will fly into a rage the second he feels even a little bit humiliated.
So what's the engine here? What really drives a guy like this to do such monstrous things?
It all comes down to this constant, nagging fear that he's just not enough. Every terrible thing he does, every execution, every manipulation, it's all just a desperate attempt to shout down that voice in his head telling him he's weak. Phoenix makes that insecurity so real, so visible, that the character's evil becomes totally tied to his neediness. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes insecurity can be way more destructive than calculated evil ever could.
So, let's pull all this together. What do all of these incredibly different performances have in common? Well, they don't just show us evil. They make that evil make sense on a deeply psychological level.
Think about it. You've got the manipulator who disguises friction as unity, the bureaucrat who calls cruelty discipline, the professional whose evil is just another day at the office, the visionary who sees genocide as progress, and the tyrant whose rage is just a cover for feeling small. They all show us a form of evil that follows its own disturbing but coherent logic.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? These actors aren't monsters, they're just masters of their craft. They understand human nature so deeply that they can build a character whose evil choices follow a clear and frankly terrifying internal logic. And when an actor pulls that off, something shifts in us. We stop seeing the performance, and we almost start seeing the person. We get so pulled into the logic of their evil that we can't help but wonder, just for a second, if some part of it is actually real. And that is the power and maybe the danger of playing the villain just a little too well. So, I'll leave you with this to chew on. Who's that one villain that got so deep under your skin that for a moment you completely forgot you were watching an actor? It's a pretty fascinating and maybe a little unsettling thing to think about.